Have you ever found yourself feeling more frustrated with your husband as the years go by? What once felt like a deep connection may now feel like distant silence or even resentment. Many women in long-term marriages experience this shift, but few truly understand why it happens. Resent doesn't come from a single moment of disappointment. It builds over years of small frustrations, unmet emotional needs, and a growing realization that something feels off in the relationship. What was once effortless now requires work, and when that effort is one-sided, frustration can turn into deep-seated resentment. Many women don't speak about it at first. They brush it off, telling themselves that all marriages go through phases, that things will get better with time. But when those feelings linger, when the same problems repeat themselves year after year without change, that's when quiet frustration turns into something deeper, something that can't be ignored. Today, we're going to explore the real reasons why women begin to resent their husbands as they age. These aren't just surface-level complaints. They are patterns that slowly chip away at a relationship and create emotional distance. Stay with me until the end, because recognizing these patterns is the first step toward change. Before we begin, I want to thank you for being here. If you find this discussion valuable, subscribe to Graceful Elderly, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps us continue bringing important and meaningful conversations to those who need them. One of the biggest reasons women begin to resent their husbands over time is the weight of emotional labor. Years of tending to the household, remembering important dates, keeping track of family schedules, and being the one who smooths over conflicts, all without appreciation or acknowledgement. To me, on labor is not just about doing chores. It's about being the unseen manager of a marriage and a home, making sure birthdays are remembered, that the children's needs are met, that social connections are maintained, and that life continues to run smoothly for everyone in the family. Many men assume that providing financially means they've done their part, but a marriage is far more than just financial support. It's about emotional partnership. If a woman spends decades taking care of everyone, ensuring that the family's emotional and logistical needs are met, and her husband never fully sees or appreciates that effort, resentment begins to take root. Take Carol, a 72-year-old retired teacher. For decades, she balanced raising children, working full-time, and making sure her husband's life was smooth. She planned the holidays, picked out the gifts, remembered anniversaries, and took care of the family's emotional needs. But looking back, she realized something: no one had ever done the same for her. Her husband never once asked if she needed help or thanked her for all the invisible work she did. Now, decades later, she didn't feel love anymore. She felt exhaustion. What makes emotional labor so frustrating is that it's invisible. A woman can spend her entire marriage ensuring everything runs smoothly, but if her husband never acknowledges that effort, he will never understand why she feels distant or resentful. It's not that she's suddenly changed, it's that she reached her limit. When appreciation fades, love begins to shift. In the early years of marriage, a simple thank you or a thoughtful gesture might have been enough. But after decades of carrying the weight of a household alone without acknowledgement, that once loving woman begins to pull away. She no longer feels like a partner. She feels like an overworked caretaker. If this sounds familiar, if you've ever felt unseen, despite everything you do, know that you are not alone. This is not a sudden shift. This is the result of years of emotional exhaustion and the feeling that your contributions have been taken for granted. In the next section, we'll discuss another major reason resentment builds over time, and that is the painful realization that you and your husband are no longer truly connected. The relationship that once felt like a deep partnership may now feel like two people simply coexisting under the same roof. Stay with me, because this next topic is one that many women silently struggle with, but few openly discuss. One of the most heartbreaking shifts that happens in a long-term marriage is when a woman realizes that she no longer feels like a wife, but instead like a roommate. In the early years of marriage, there is closeness, shared dreams, and meaningful conversations. But over time, if both partners stop nurturing their relationship, what remains is a partnership that feels more like two people simply coexisting, rather than a marriage built on love and connection. This shift does not happen overnight. It begins slowly at first. Maybe it's just a few missed date nights or a lack of deep conversations. Then routines take over, the same daily schedules, the same small talk, the same habits, until one day she realizes that she and her husband no longer truly know each other. They may eat meals together. They may sit in the same room watching TV, but the intimacy, the laughter, the feeling of being desired has disappeared. This is exactly what happened to Linda, a 69-year-old retired nurse. In the early years of her marriage, she and her husband would spend hours talking about their future, laughing together, sharing inside jokes. But over the years, the conversations became shorter. He stopped asking about her day. He spent more time staring at his phone or watching television rather than engaging with her. She would bring up things she was interested in, but his responses were short, uninterested, passive. At first, she tried to brush it off, telling herself that all marriages change with time. But one night, as they sat in silence eating dinner, she looked at him and realized she felt lonelier sitting next to her husband than she did when she was alone. This feeling of emotional loneliness is one that many women experience, but rarely talk about. Many husbands don't even realize this change is happening. They assume that because there are no major arguments or conflicts, everything must be fine. But for women, silence is not peace. Silence is often a sign that she has given up on trying to feel connected. The painful truth is that many women try to fix this long before they give up. They bring it up. They ask for more connection, more affection, more attention. They say, "I miss the way things used to be. I wish we spent more time together." But if those words are ignored or dismissed as complaining, then slowly but surely she stops asking, and once a woman stops trying to reconnect, the emotional distance becomes permanent. Many men fail to realize that women need emotional intimacy just as much as physical intimacy. They need to feel wanted, appreciated, engaged in meaningful conversations. A husband who stops putting in effort, stops flirting, stops showing interest in his wife as a person slowly turns into someone his wife resents, because when a woman no longer feels desired, she begins to ask herself, why am I even here? One of the worst parts about this emotional disconnect is that it often sneaks up on people in the beginning of a marriage. Couples naturally put in effort. They talk, they touch, they express appreciation. But over time, the assumption that love is automatic takes over. What many men don't understand is that a woman never stops needing to feel seen, loved, and valued. When the small moments of connection disappear, when the compliments fade, when the thoughtful gestures stop happening, she feels less like a wife and more like an obligation. This isn't just about romance. It's about feeling valued. If a woman tries to engage her husband in conversation and he gives half-hearted responses, if she makes plans and he shows no interest, if she reaches for his hand and he doesn't hold it back, over time those moments build into something painful. When a woman begins to feel like an afterthought, resentment is not far behind. Another major factor is how routine takes over. Many long-term couples fall into the trap of living parallel lives. They share the same home, but they no longer share their thoughts, their fears, their excitement for the future. What used to be a relationship filled with energy and connection now feels like two separate people living under the same roof. This is what happened to Margaret, a 72-year-old retired librarian. She and her husband had a strong marriage. In the beginning, they traveled together, went on adventures, shared new experiences. But over time, he became content with the routine: work, TV, sleep, repeat. When she suggested doing something new, like going to a concert or taking a short trip, he dismissed it, saying, "I'm happy the way things are." But she wasn't, and he didn't even notice. That was the moment she realized they had grown apart, not because she had changed, but because he had stopped growing with her. Many women in long-term marriages experience this moment, the realization that they are still evolving, still seeking new experiences, still wanting to grow emotionally, but their husbands remain in the same place, stuck in old routines, uninterested in change. This leaves many women feeling trapped in a marriage that no longer fulfills them, not because they don't love their husbands, but because they no longer feel like they are living. They are simply existing. The most painful part of this emotional distance is that it often feels irreversible. Many women ask themselves, how did we get here? When did we stop being us? They mourn the marriage they used to have, the man who used to look at them with admiration, the partner who used to care about their dreams. When a woman feels like she is losing herself in a marriage, she doesn't just feel lonely, she feels invisible. This shift from connection to distance, from passion to routine, from being a cherished wife to feeling like an unappreciated housemate, is one of the biggest reasons why resentment builds in long-term marriages. What was once a source of love and comfort slowly becomes a source of quiet pain. If this resonates with you, you are not alone. Countless women go through this shift, wondering if they are the only ones who feel this way, if they are asking too much, if they are being unreasonable. But the truth is, feeling loved, feeling appreciated, feeling connected is not asking too much. It is the foundation of a fulfilling marriage, while emotional distance is one of the biggest reasons women resent their husbands as they age. There is another painful realization that happens in many long-term relationships that only adds to the frustration, and that is the feeling of being taken for granted. After years of dedication, love, and effort, many women reach a point where they feel that everything they do goes unnoticed and unappreciated. In the next section, we'll explore why this happens and how years of being unrecognized for all the small things slowly turns love into resentment and emotional withdrawal. One of the deepest sources of resentment in a long-term marriage is the realization that a woman's efforts have become invisible over the years. What once felt like acts of love and care now feel like obligations, expected rather than appreciated. Many women begin their marriages with a sense of partnership. They willingly take on the responsibilities of maintaining a home, caring for their children, supporting their husbands emotionally, and handling countless small tasks that keep life running smoothly. But somewhere along the way, these efforts stop being noticed, and worse, they start being taken for granted. At the beginning of a relationship, appreciation often comes naturally. When a wife prepares a special meal, her husband thanks her. When she makes sacrifices for the family, he acknowledges it. But as the years pass, many husbands stop seeing these actions as expressions of love. Instead, they see them as routine. They assume that because their wives have always handled these things, they always will, without needing recognition. But that's not how human relationships work. Love is nurtured through appreciation, through small gestures of gratitude and acknowledgement. When a woman spends decades giving and never receiving acknowledgement in return, resentment quietly builds. Nancy, a 72-year-old retired school principal, knows this feeling well. For years, she made sure her home was a place of warmth and care. She cooked, cleaned, remembered every important date, organized social gatherings, and ensured that life for her husband and family was comfortable. She never minded at first because she loved them. But as the years passed, she noticed something heartbreaking. No one ever thanked her anymore. Her husband never noticed the effort she put in. He simply expected things to be done. When she would bring it up, he would brush it off, saying, "What do you mean? You've always done these things. Why would I thank you for it?" That single sentence made her realize that somewhere along the way, her efforts had stopped being seen. When a woman feels unappreciated for long enough, she stops wanting to give. She no longer feels the desire to go the extra mile. She used to bring her husband coffee in the morning or leave little notes for him, but now she doesn't bother. She used to plan their anniversary dinner, but now she lets it pass unnoticed, not because she wants to be cruel, but because she simply has nothing left to give. This is how resentment builds, not through one single event, but through 1,000 small moments of being overlooked and unappreciated. A wife who once loved to care for her husband now feels like she is just fulfilling an obligation. What many men don't realize is that gratitude is what keeps love alive. When a woman hears a simple thank you or sees that her husband notices her effort, it makes her feel valued. When that appreciation disappears, so does the motivation to continue giving. Another aspect of this resentment comes from how roles shift over time. In the early years of marriage, Both partners might be busy working, raising children, and building a life together. But once retirement sets in and children move out, many women find themselves doing even more while their husbands settle into a routine of comfort. Many men enjoy retirement as a time to relax, to watch television, to engage in hobbies, while their wives continue handling most of the responsibilities. Is what happened to Patricia, a 74-year-old retired accountant. After years of working and raising a family, she assumed that retirement would be a time when she and her husband could share responsibilities more equally. But instead, she found herself still cooking every meal, still handling all the household tasks, while her husband spent hours watching TV or tinkering in the garage. When she asked him for help, his response was always the same: "I worked hard all my life, I just enjoy myself now." But she had worked hard too, and now she felt like nothing had changed except that her exhaustion had caught up with her. Many women in long-term marriages feel this shift deeply. They watch as their husbands settle into routines of ease, while they continue taking care of everything. And as the years go by, that feeling of being taken for granted starts turning into something worse: bitterness. When a woman starts feeling this way, it doesn't mean she has stopped loving her husband, but it does mean she has stopped feeling loved in return. The painful truth is that many men don't even realize they have stopped showing appreciation. They don't see the countless unseen things their wives do. They assume that if she's still doing them, she must not mind. They mistake routine for contentment. But for many women, the reality is that they continue doing things not because they want to, but because they don't know how to stop. What makes this even harder is that many women hesitate to express their frustration. They worry that if they bring it up, their husbands will dismiss it, or worse, make them feel guilty for wanting acknowledgement. So they stay silent. But silence is not peace. Silence is the sound of a woman giving up on being heard. A woman who once felt deeply connected to her husband now feels like nothing more than someone who keeps the house running, keeps the meals coming, keeps the calendar organized. But who she is as a person, what she needs, what she feels, those things have faded into the background. Many men assume that because their wives are they're still cooking, still cleaning, still managing things, that everything is fine. They don't see that their wife's heart has already started pulling away, and that is where resentment thrives. When appreciation disappears, so does emotional connection. Many women who feel unappreciated start daydreaming about a life where they are noticed, where their efforts are acknowledged. They wonder what it would feel like to be seen again, to be thanked again, to have someone recognize the love and care they pour into everyday life. But here's the truth: women don't need grand gestures. They don't need expensive gifts or dramatic declarations of love. They need to feel valued. They need to hear thank you. They need to know that their efforts matter. A simple acknowledgement, a moment of gratitude, a small act of kindness from a husband can make an enormous difference. When a husband notices that his wife has taken the time to make his favorite meal, when he tells her that he appreciates how she keeps their lives running smoothly, when he recognizes her sacrifices over the years and genuinely thanks her, that alone can soften years of resentment. It's not too late for a marriage to be healed. It's not too late for appreciation to be restored, but it requires awareness and effort, and it requires husbands to open their eyes to the woman who has been standing beside them all these years while feeling unappreciated. Is one of the deepest sources of resentment. There is another painful realization that many women experience as they age, and that is the feeling of growing apart from the man they once knew. In the next section, we will explore how years of emotional distance and lack of connection can turn what was once a loving partnership into a relationship that feels like two strangers living under the same roof. When a woman no longer recognizes the man she married, the question becomes, is it too late to find their way back to each other, or has the distance already become permanent? One of the most painful realizations for many women in long-term marriages is that over time, they and their husbands have grown apart. What once felt like a deep, loving partnership now feels like a relationship between two distant individuals. This doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually in the small moments, when conversations fade, when laughter becomes less frequent, when shared dreams become separate routines before they even realize that they are no longer walking through life together, but merely existing side by side. Many women reach a point where they look at their husbands and think, who is this person, and how did we end up here? They remember the man who used to make them laugh, who used to ask about their thoughts, who once held their hand without thinking, but that version of their husband seems to have faded, replaced by someone who barely acknowledges them beyond the practical necessities of life. This is exactly what happened to Margaret, a 74-year-old retired social worker. She and her husband had been together for over 40 years. In the beginning, they would stay up late talking about their hopes, their fears, their future. They went on road trips, held hands as they walked through the park, and genuinely enjoyed each other's company. But over time, the deep conversations stopped. They started living parallel lives. He spent more time in his routine, reading the newspaper, watching television, barely acknowledging her presence. At first, she tried to reconnect. She suggested going out more, having deeper conversations, but every attempt was met with indifference. So eventually, she stopped trying. Many men assume that if there's no conflict, then everything is fine. They believe that as long as their wives aren't complaining, then there's no problem. But for a woman, silence isn't peace. Silence is often a sign that she has given up. This emotional distance can be even more painful than arguments. When there's conflict, it means both people still care enough to fight for something. But when the distance sets in, when two people can go days or even weeks without meaningful conversation, that is when love starts to fade into resentment. Many women find themselves mourning not just the marriage they used to have, but the person they used to be. They realize that they no longer share meaningful experiences with their husbands. They no longer feel emotionally connected. And what's worse, their husbands don't seem to notice or care. Another painful realization for many women is that while they have continued growing, evolving, and exploring new interests, their husbands have remained the same. Many women reach a stage in life where they want to try new things, take up hobbies, travel, explore different aspects of themselves. But if their husbands are uninterested in growing alongside them, it creates a painful divide. This was exactly the case for Helen, a 68-year-old retired librarian. For decades, she devoted herself to raising children, managing a home, and supporting her husband's career. But when she reached retirement, she realized she wanted more. She wanted to travel, to try new things, to step outside of the predictable routines that had defined her life. But her husband was content to do the same things he had always done, sitting in his chair, watching the same television shows, never interested in new experiences. Whenever she suggested something different, he would shrug and say, "I'm happy the way things are." But she wasn't, and he didn't even notice. Soon a woman realizes that she is still growing, but her husband is not. She starts to feel like she is outgrowing the marriage. She starts to feel trapped, not by love, but by the realization that her partner is no longer someone who excites her, inspires her, or even truly understands her. Many women express that the emotional loneliness of growing apart is worse than being physically alone. They feel like they are living with someone who no longer sees them, truly sees them as the person they are today, not just as the wife they once were. This is where resentment takes root. In the beginning, it may just feel like frustration, wishing for deeper conversations or more shared activities, but over time, as those needs continue to go unmet, it turns into something deeper. It turns into a realization that they are in a marriage with someone who no longer puts in the effort to know. One of the hardest parts about this emotional disconnect is that many husbands don't realize how deeply their wives feel this pain. They assume that because they are present in the same home, sitting in the same room, eating at the same table, that this means they are still connected. But true connection isn't about physical proximity. It's about emotional intimacy. It's about the small moments of affection, the shared laughter, the curiosity about each other's thoughts and dreams. When those things disappear, the foundation of the relationship weakens. What many men don't understand is that women need to feel desired, valued, and engaged in the relationship, not just in the early years, but always when a husband stops showing interest and his wife stops making her feel special, stops listening to her the way he once did. She doesn't just feel lonely, she starts to feel invisible. And once a woman feels invisible in her marriage, resentment is not far behind. Many women don't want to leave their marriages. They don't want to start over. They don't want to lose the years of history they have built with their husbands, but they do want more. They want to feel loved again. They want to feel appreciated again. They want to feel like they matter to the person they have spent their life with. Saddest part is that many women reach this realization too late. By the time they understand just how deeply disconnected they feel, they have already emotionally withdrawn. And when a woman emotionally withdraws from her marriage, it is incredibly difficult to bring her back. But here's the thing, it's not too late for a marriage to be healed. It's not too late for connection to be restored. But it takes effort, it takes awareness, it takes a willingness to see each other again, truly see each other, not just as the person you've shared a home with for years, but as the individual with thoughts, dreams, and feelings that still matter. Many women who have experienced this emotional distance say that they don't need grand gestures, they don't need expensive gifts or elaborate vacations. They just need their husbands to try to ask them about their day, to hold their hand without reason, to look at them like they are more than just part of the furniture in their home. They need to feel seen again. If you have ever felt like you and your husband have grown apart, if you have ever wondered when your marriage stopped feeling like a love story and started feeling like a routine, know that you are not alone. This is something many women experience, but few talk about. Final thoughts: resentment doesn't happen overnight. It builds slowly over years of feeling unseen, unappreciated, and disconnected. Many women in long-term marriages reach a point where they question if things will ever feel the same again, if their husband will ever look at them the way he once did, if they will ever feel truly cherished in their relationship again. But the truth is, love is not just something that exists on its own. It is something that must be nurtured. When a woman starts resenting her husband, it is often because she has spent too long feeling like she is the only one fighting for the relationship, and that is a loneliness no one deserves to feel. For those who recognize themselves in these words, know that your feelings are valid, your longing for connection is valid, and your desire to feel loved is not too much to ask. Whether it's through honest conversations, through small changes, or through a renewed effort from both partners, there is still hope for finding the love that once felt so natural, so effortless, and so real.